What's up, YouTube? Hey, I just finished the LF swap on this 85 F-150, and I wanted to go through some stuff. I've had a lot of questions for other people when I was getting started, and I get a lot of questions from people who are wanting to do this swap. So I figured I'd take you guys through some of the basics and some of the stuff that people don't tell you about doing an LS swap. I apologize, I have a small child with me today. I chose an LQ4, just the 6-liter with a 4L80E. The engine and transmission I got were out of a 4-wheel drive Suburban, so it came with the transfer case still on it. So I had to swap it to 2-wheel drive, which really isn't as hard as you think it might be. I've been into a couple automatics before, but I've never swapped 4-wheel drive to 2-wheel drive or anything like that. Just replace, bands and stuff like that. But if you are mechanically capable, if you're mechanically inclined or capable, and you're not afraid to get a little dirty, and you can watch a YouTube video or two, the swap isn't that hard. And I will link the video down there for y'all that I used, and the dude did a really good job explaining everything. The hardest part of the whole thing is getting everything back together, especially in the 4L80 because it's so heavy. All the parts are heavy. Ended up looking like I got in a fight with a stack of paper. By the time I was done, my fingers were all chewed up. Looked like paper cuts everywhere. But I got it done. I got it in. Doesn't leak. So one thing that nobody tells you about the 4L80 swap is there's a small outlet in the tail shaft housing. In a 4-wheel drive, that outlet is completely blocked off. There's no plug. In a 2-wheel drive, it has a small pinhole. That is something that you will need to order while it's all apart, because you need to knock it out from the inside. So make sure you get the tail shaft housing, the output shaft, and that little plug, and I can't remember what it's called. If you look around on eBay, they have all three in a kit. I didn't buy all three in a kit because I didn't know I needed it. I bought just tail shaft housing and the tail shaft, and had to buy that little part separate. Not a big deal, but it cost me time. And that's the biggest thing. That's what killed me on the LS swap, was not knowing what parts I needed to buy to make things just flow. So we'll go through some of those things, and I have a whole parts list. And a lot of folks will tell you, oh, you can swap a LS for $3 grand. Probably, but you need a donor rig that's cheap, so you can get the motor and trans out. You're going to want to start with the 2-wheel drive if you're in a 2-wheel drive truck like I am. But it's the little stuff that costs you money in these swaps, and a lot more than I think people realize. Like, if you were to ask me before I ran all the numbers how much it cost me to swap that motor into that truck without the cost of the engine, I would have told you $2,000 or $3,000. I ran all the numbers this morning. It's significantly more than that. So we'll go through all that, and I'll probably break this video down. But for right now, let's take a look at the truck. So the biggest thing is about these that was kind of complicated and took me the most time to do were these motor mounts down there. Now, they're very simple once you figure out where you want to put everything. My biggest problem was I didn't have headers yet, and I was trying to get as much little stuff done as I could before all the parts started rolling in, so when I got everything showed up, it was ready to go. So we'll talk about these motor mounts. Now, these motor mounts are just a universal kit. The reason I didn't purchase them originally was everybody said you can reuse the factory motor mounts from the GM. No, you can't. Not even close. I tried. I would have to fabricate a ton of stuff to make that happen. It just really wasn't in the cards. So with that being said, I bought a universal kit. It just comes with these tabs that are right here that mount to the frame. Come at like, I don't know, like 6 inches long or something, and you just cut them to fit, drop the motor in. Fords generally come with the engine offset to the passenger side a little bit. I brought it back to center. No particular reason why I did that other than I just wanted the motor in the middle of the truck. And I have plenty of room with these headers. Now, you cannot buy headers for an 85 Ford pickup with an LS in it. They don't make them. So, you can buy headers for a C10 Chevrolet that fit real nice. So these come from Speed Engineering. And as you can see, I have quite a bit of room. I probably only have an inch by that frame. You can't really see it because the trans cooler lines are in the way and they need to be moved a little bit anyway. I just got done messing with a bunch of that stuff and I haven't quite finished everything up down there. But I would recommend that you have them in possession before you mount the engine, just to make sure everything fits. The only downside to these, and I don't really know if you want to call it a downside, is that over here on the passenger side, it gets really close to that 4L80. Right there. As you can see, I had to cut that off. So there's a big tab over there, and I think what it is a lifting tab for the 4L80. And they even say in the instructions, if you have a 4L80, you'll have to trim it, the tabs off. And I just took a Sawzall, reached down there and nipped it off. Didn't take very long. It went really, really fast because it's aluminum. So super easy to cut off. But just keep that in mind. If you buy these C10 headers from Speed Engineering, you have to cut that off. The next hardest thing on this truck, and it's not that it was hard to do, it's that I didn't know what I needed to do it, was all the power steering and stuff. And I got a bunch of mixed information online about that. One fella had said that he needed to use a she's just talking over there, that he had to use a relief valve, kind of like a proportioning valve, to let some of the high pressure out of the system. And the reasoning for that is GM uses a high pressure power steering pump, Ford uses a low pressure power steering pump and box. And I've heard mixed things. Some people say you can run them, some people say you can't. I just hooked mine up and I didn't have a problem. What you need to do this though, and I'll see if I can find the part numbers for all this stuff, is you need the fittings that go into the power steering box on the Ford. You can retain the factory little cheesy cooler that Ford uses if you want to. The return line's not pressurized and it's the same size as the GM, so everything fits together right there like that. And then back in here, it's just 6AN line and fittings once you get to that piece down there. And then you need the one for the GM power steering pump to 6AN, and then just put a 96AN back in here. It drops it out this way, brings it out around, and this is a 45 6AN fitting. And I got all those off Evil Engineering from Amazon, and they're fairly reasonably priced, and they seem to be just fine. That was probably my biggest hang-up, and the biggest problem was I didn't know what I needed. That's the purpose of this video. I will try to get all the links for all that information. And I spent days and days and days trying to figure out what I needed for this, and nobody seems to know. So I know, and I will give you that information. One of the next biggest swap issues is fuel line. So you can see here I have my feed line is in silver, turn line's in black. Those just run out down onto the frame rail. There's the pump down there. It's in the stock Ford location for a fuel injected 302, which is what this truck had. That's a Walbro. Can't remember the exact part number. It's a 255 liter per hour for an LS swap. You can buy from Walbro, when you buy these, the correct fuel fittings and save yourself a bunch of a headache. So what I did is I just bought 6AN because I didn't know that you could buy the quick disconnect parts for the Ford stuff to fit all that stuff at the time. Once again, days and days of trying to figure it out. Ended up buying some really expensive fittings from Edelbrock. They're the Earl's brand. They didn't work and they failed. They broke. And I don't even know how they broke. I was just driving it and all of a sudden there's fuel spewing everywhere. And I'll put that information in probably in the next video. And I'll go a little more in depth onto the fuel system, because it is a bit of a pain to go through, and it's just going to take me a while to go through everything I had to do to make that work. One part that they don't tell you you need, but you need, is this little guy. That silver piece right there. That goes into the vacuum port in the LQ4 manifold. I think all LS manifolds, or most LS manifolds, are the same. Converts it to 6AN for my brake booster line. You'll need that little part. Obviously brake boosters aren't under pressure. You don't need to run a stainless steel braided line, but I had that chunk in that length laying around and I just put the fittings on and ran with it, and it works fine. One of the next things, so we got, is the wiring. I'm not going to go in depth on the wiring of this whole truck, but I will tell you this. In the Ford engine, let's go over to the 302. This is the 302 out of the truck. The engine harness comes out in a similar way as the LS engine harness comes out of the LS rig. It's just one separate piece. So in my truck, and I know a lot of the Fords are different based on years, my whole engine harness ran through this big grommet back here, and then my computer is mounted in the firewall, like right there. So I just unplugged it and fished the big long plugs on the Ford harness through the hole, unhooked everything, just pulled it all out as one piece. And then what I did is on Fords, over here, there's right where the ECM sits in the truck now, there's 3 great big plugs, and this is one of them. This is another one. They're kind of just sitting down there. I'm not quite done with all the wiring perfectly where I like it yet, but in those wires, and I believe this is the one. No, I'm actually not sure now. This is for the torque converter in the LS. This is for, I think this is my ignition wire. I'd have to go through and double check which one it is anymore, but it's in this plug, and that gives you a hot signal basically on start and run position. So that's the one you tie into your harness for your computer. One of the things that you don't find out till later when you're doing stuff like this, if you've never done it, is you have your neutral safety switches in your transmission. I bought a painless harness for this truck, and everything's labeled what you need. So all you have to do is go through painless's instructions real well, but you need to know what wires do what. I just used a combination of a test light and an ohm meter, put on the diode beep setting so I could hear things when things got in the correct gears, and that helped me immensely get the correct wires hooked back into the Ford harness. And I just cut the plug off of the stock Ford tranny harness that goes to the truck and wired the LS harness from painless into that plug and made all that work. Like I said, I'll do another wiring video where I go into everything on this. Now you can run the stock GM fan. 6 liters had a clutch and a mechanical fan. I chose not to go that route and just went with these fans here. I've got 2 of them. This shroud I had laying around, why I chose these fans is in the picture. They were running almost an identical shroud to what I already had laying around for something else. I've had it for 10 years. I couldn't tell you what it's even off of. And they work awesome. They pull a ton of air. They're reversible fans. They're set up obviously in pole position. They're pulling vacuum through the radiator into the shroud. And then the shroud, I don't know why, but I mounted the dang thing upside down. I didn't even realize I had done it until all done. It's got these rubber flaps that are supposed to be up when the fans are on. It sucks them closed. And then when you're driving down the road, it opens them up and it lets the air blow around the fans instead of having to push through the fans. So far, it hasn't caused an issue, but I'm sure that it will. Well, I'm not sure that it will, but I'm sure that I need to change it. I don't want to change my mounting tabs and do a nice piece of aluminum all the way across. So that's kind of a deal there. Trans cooler. So I ran an auxiliary trans cooler that sits in front of my radiator. You can see the stainless lines coming up. They go under my radiator and it's mounted down here. There's no way you can see it. That's how I'm cooling the transmission. And the reason I did that is I still had the original transmission cooler radiator combo in the truck, and I plan on reusing the stock radiator. Eventually I had to change it to this aluminum one, and I would just use the regular tranny cooler lines, which are here, and I may switch to that. I would have done that originally, but I didn't know. My stock transmission exploded driving down the freeway. That's what prompted the swap. So I didn't know what kind of chunks were floating around in there, and I didn't want to put them through a new transmission. So for now, I have the cooler set up. I'll probably still run the cooler and just jump a line over to the radiator cooler and then jump a line back into it and just call that good, which should work fine. So back to the fans. They're powered by this relay box. The relay only runs the ground to the fans. The way GM sets up their stuff, these two wires here come out of the ECM, and they are ground wires. So when they kick on, it sends a ground signal through them, not a hot signal. A little something to think about. So that's running that. As far as the hooking up the radiator to the GM from the Ford, they don't fit, obviously. They're also routed backwards from what they should be, but I have not had any problems. The GM is the smaller size in the Ford. You can buy these conversion nipples right there. One side's bigger than the other. That's all I did. I just cut my stock hoses, stock GM hose, stock Ford hose, cut them where they kind of fit together. Same on the other side. And it doesn't look the best, but it gets the job done. No problems there. Silly things that you will need with these headers. I think that's it for cooling. The basics of it anyway. For the headers, they require a different spark plug wire. These are their spark plug wires. I bought a set of real nice thick ones with the stock GM big old aluminum thing that sticks out, and they worked, but I was afraid that they were going to burn up because they touched headers a lot. One other thing that's kind of iffy on these headers is you can see my oil pressure sending unit down there. Yeah, that's it right there. That wire is within fractions of an inch of being on the header. So far, no problems, but I don't really like it. I think the better solution here would have been to run a 90-degree fitting off of that and put my oil pressure sensor pointing straight down. Probably would have helped my problem, or straight forward, just to get that wire away from those headers. I might still do that. It's such a pain to take off where it is. And other than that, it seems to be working fine. And I'll post a link to the part that you need to plug that in there, because 6 liters come with an oil cooler from the factory, and it runs 2 hard lines up against the block down here, and they run up in here, and the dude I bought the engine from cut them off with a, I don't know, used a squirrel to chew them in half or something, but they were mangled and unusable. Same with the tranny cooler lines, they were mangled and unusable, so I cut them off, ran stainless braided line. No issues with that so far. The transmission is the one thing that has given me absolutely zero issues whatsoever. It's been great. I did the swap. I was nervous about it. Like I said, I haven't really been into transmissions very much. I did the 4-wheel drive to 2-wheel drive conversion, And it took me a long time to get the tranny back together, and I was nervous, but I fired it up, ran fine. I'm happy. Remember to put Dextron 6 in the transmission because it's really expensive, and that's what GM likes to use. Same power steering fluid, has to be synthetic for GM. And then heater lines are different size than Ford lines. However, one size is the same as the Ford line. Ford uses the same size on both. GM uses a big one and a small one for whatever reason. The small one fits fine. I cut a chunk of the GM line off and tapped it in. I think it's down here under the intake where you can't see it. And there's one of those conversion nipples like what I have in the radiator hose. Takes it from the correct GM size to the correct Ford size. No problems there. Heater works great. Other big issues. Getting an intake was kind of a pain. I don't like how it sits. And I can't flip it over to the other side. I'd like to have it sitting right here. But this radiator hose and the alternator kind of make that a pain in the butt. So I flipped it back over to the factory GM side instead of the factory Ford side. And I think what I'm going to end up doing is just moving my battery over to the other side. I'll put the battery right here by the computer. And then I can build a little air box because I have all the hard line or the hard box for the this was made for a Suburban or pickup, 2000, 2001, whatever the heck year it was. And it's just one of those cheap O'Reilly's brands. I actually have a brand spanking new one from a different company somewhere, but I already had this on, and I had to buy this because I was literally driving the truck with no filter. So I went down to O'Reilly's to buy a set of O2 sensors, and they had this sitting on the shelf. So I was like, oh, I'll just take that. It's way more expensive than it needed to be, but it's in there. What else do we have? So for the tranny cooler lines, you need the fittings to go to 6AN. You can just look up 4L80E to 6AN fittings. For some reason, they came in a 4-pack, and there's only 2. So I don't know why they came in a 4-pack. I couldn't find them in a 2-pack, but I bought them in a 4-pack. And they were like, I don't know, 10, 12 bucks or something. And they just thread right into the existing tranny cooler fitting holes. The one thing that you do get beat up on when you swap to the painless harness is you have no way to power the truck. You can power the engine, but you can't power the truck. So you just have to tap into the existing wiring. And like I said, I'll do a whole wiring video on this thing once I get it all done and completed. And the fuel system one, I kind of went over most of the cooling system today. I think that really about covers everything of the basic stuff. Oh, one thing that you'll need that they don't tell you is you'll need a driveline. And I really think I could have got away with using the factory GM driveline. And I didn't have the yoke for the rear end at the time. I didn't even think about putting it in. And actually, I believe I mounted the engine and transmission cross member before I even had the two-wheel drive conversion, because I had this engine in and out quite a few times. No front clip on the truck. It just basically falls in and out with no front clip. So I just plopped it in, built everything, went to got my transmission converted over, went to set everything, and my drive line was like 2 inches short. So there's room to go back 2 inches on this engine, and had I known that, I would have just moved the engine back 2 inches, and I could have used the stock GM driveline, because I believe this engine and transmission was out of Suburban, 4-wheel drive Suburban. But if you don't have that luxury, you'll need to buy a driveline. Or I just sent the Suburban one in to get it lengthened, which is basically retubed. They did a decent job on it. I can feel a little bit of a vibration, but it's really minute at a certain speed, and I assume it's from that drive shaft, but I don't know for certain. And then you need a yoke from the Ford. Whatever axle you're using, GM uses in these, whereas a 1350 U-joint, I believe the Ford was Might have been a 1310, I don't remember. But anyway, I just bought a 1350 yoke for the Ford 8.8 and bolted it on. No issues there. Went through the rear end on it, and the truck's in great shape. Backlash is still good and everything, so I'm not really worried about that. I might change the axle when I blow it up. But that's pretty much it for the drivetrain. And I think I would have had a lot more problems getting the engine and transmission, or the engine to mount correctly with the radiator had I used the stock fan. I would have had to spend way more time getting everything lined up perfectly. I would have had to drop the engine in, put the core support back in, the radiator back in, and then the fan shroud from the Ford, which actually fits the GM fan pretty good. I would have had to put that all back in to get my height adjustment right in order to be able to use the stock Ford fan or the stock GM fan in the Ford shroud. So I just opted to go with electric. It was so much easier, so much easier. I wouldn't even attempt to do the mechanical fan with the shroud, just because of how much time it would take. It would be a nightmare. So then the Ford uses vacuum operated heater controls. All I had to do was pop the plug off the end of that. It just has a little tab. You snap it off with a pair of pliers, plug the stock vacuum lines into the GM manifold. No problems there. Everything works as it should. As far as the heater goes, Ford has a specific wire for the heater itself that's tapped in up here. No issues there. Everything works fine. I think that wraps it up for most of the big stuff. I did have to move one brake line, and all I had to do was just bend it out of the way a little bit. One of the hard lines from the Ford, I just bent it out of the way a tiny bit, and I have had no problems with that either. So just things you'll have to think about. I think they were just too close to the headers, and I was worried about it. I'm also worried about that fuel pump being so close to the headers, but so far it's not giving me any problems. Walbro pumps are supposed to be the best that you can get for these for a reasonable price. It seems to be the hot item ticket for swapping them. My only complaint is it's really loud. You can actually hear the pump over the engine running, which is, I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but I could have went for a little bit quieter. I would have been happy with that. But the engine runs, drives, and sounds great. I did have a few problems with the engine when I first started it. Biggest thing that I had was spark plugs were completely toast. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the people that owned this vehicle that this engine was in didn't throw the whole car away because of a set of bad spark plugs. I have a picture of them. I'll post it. It was misfiring on most of the cylinders randomly and not all at the same time. Drove like crap. It would pop and sputter. Nothing worked correctly. So, and it was just covered in grease. I degreased the engine before I put it in. And I don't even know how, because there's not a single oil leak on it. It's perfectly dry under my truck every single day. And I don't know how it has so much oil on it. It kind of blows my mind. The alternator makes a little noise, but I don't know how many miles that the engine had on it exactly. It was like around low 100s. I think it was like 110, 120. I have no idea how in the heck the spark plugs got that bad in the amount of time that they got that bad in. It just blows my mind. Stupid little things that you'll need. You need to mount these. Mount your ECM. So I'd buy some mounting brackets, painted them red to match kind of the rest of the truck. It's got a red interior and all that stuff. They're overpriced, like $35. You could make some. I thought about making them, and I was like, I'm just kind of tired of making everything, so I bought them. I really want something different. I just changed that radiator, so that's kind of hanging out in here to make sure everything's full. I wanted something that covered this wire loom up in here, because obviously this isn't going to cover however big that is. So that may be something for the 3D printer. Just get in, build a little cover. I wanted something to cover the whole box. I couldn't even find one. I looked all over for them, couldn't find them. Like I said, I may just 3D print that. And I want to cover all these fuses as well and make that a little prettier. That's from Painless. One thing that my biggest gripe on the Painless was nothing was loomed. I assumed for the $500+ you spend on some wires and plugs that it would at least have loom on it. I didn't read the fine print, and that's on me, so whatever. But once again, that'll be part of the wiring video. So I think for this video we're gonna send it off with a video of the truck running, fire it up, give you a couple revs on it, and let you see how it sounds. It runs. I'm so happy with it. The 6-liter LQ4. It's not a high revving engine in a stock form, and my belief is that it's mostly on the cam. I'm still running a stock cam, and it'll rev up to 6 grand, no problem, but only in the lower gears. If I'm running out at, highway speeds, I'm not going to see 6 grand, and it just kind of drops off on horsepower up there in the low 4,000 ranges, or drops off on torque. So I need to open it up, let it breathe a little in the higher RPMs, and I think it'll run absolutely great. But the nice thing about it is if I'm driving at 60 miles an hour down the freeway, you breathe on the throttle and you're doing 90. You don't have to rev it up. You don't have to stab it to the floor. You just give it a little more and you're doing 90 miles an hour down the freeway. It's incredible engine compared to the stock 302 from 25 years prior. So, or 15 years prior to this one, I guess. So we'll send it off with a video of the truck running and see what you guys think.